All right, welcome. Today we're going to jump right into an explainer that pretty much flips the script on everything we think we know about leadership, power, and what it really means to be in charge.
So let's start with a big question that's going to guide us through this whole story. What if the most powerful way to have control is to actually give it away? I know, it sounds like a total paradox, right? But let's explore how that could possibly work.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this idea, we kind of need a framework. Let's think of control as a spectrum, with 3 different ways you can try to influence things around you.
On one side, you've got manipulation. Using sneaky tactics to get your way. It might work for a little while, but over time, it just destroys trust. And then, way over on the other end, you have the total opposite, releasing control. Just consciously letting go to empower other people. And that builds trust like nothing else.
And then, smack dab in the middle, you have collaboration. This is that sweet spot where control is shared and everyone's focused on the same goals. Okay, so now that we have this framework, let's see how it plays out in, well, a place you've definitely been before.
Yep, we're leaving the theory behind and heading straight into the aisles of a grocery store. Because a little leadership experiment there ended up revealing some really big truths about human nature. So this story comes from a guy who used to be a supervisor at a grocery store. And when he got a little bit of power, instead of doing what everyone else does, he decided to try something totally different.
His whole idea was pretty radical, honestly. As soon as he got authority, his plan was to just give it away. He looked at that whole top-down manager thing and thought, this is just not efficient. So his very first move was to hand that power over to the people actually doing the work.
And you know what? The results were incredible. I mean, when you trust people with real responsibility, their motivation, their sense of ownership, it just skyrockets. Problems get solved way faster. And the leader, well, they stop being a commander and become more of a coach.
But he didn't just hand out power to anyone. He actually had a method. He created this core group of collaborators, and he gave them a name, the crew.
And how he formed the crew was so simple but really effective. First, he just looked for the people who were already stepping up, the ones willing to take on a bit more. Then he went to them directly and gave them real authority. And just like that, this informal but super powerful team was born.
And this really gets to the core of why it worked so well. Being on the crew wasn't about having a special title or anything. It was like the quote says, you knew who was on the crew just by watching who was getting things done. It was all about earning that status through your actions.
But here's maybe the most brilliant part of the whole thing. There was one critical rule for the crew. You never judge the people who weren't on the crew, the ones who worked a little slower or just didn't want that extra responsibility. That one simple rule stopped this high-performing group from turning into some kind of toxic, elitist clique.
And that rule was so important because this supervisor really got the idea of interdependence. He knew that the crew could only do their thing, that fast-paced, higher-level work, because other people were handling the essentials, like running the registers. Every single person had a vital role, no matter what their pace was.
So, okay, everything's working perfectly, right? The team's motivated, the store's running like a well-oiled machine. But then, the twist. Turns out, not everyone was a fan of this new system.
Yeah, it's this weird paradox. This super effective way of leading actually started creating resentment. It came from some of the people who weren't on the crew. And, get this, from his own bosses.
And this one moment just says it all. He suggested that one of the crew members could take over for him, and his boss just sarcastically shoots back, "Oh, just what we need, another Dustin." It shows you they just didn't get it. They didn't see an empowered team. They saw a threat to their old school way of doing things.
So that leads us to the big question, doesn't it? If this whole thing caused so much pushback from management, was the experiment a failure?
Well, the answer is a total reframing of the situation. He says no, it wasn't a failure. It was actually really fortunate. Why? Because if his bosses had loved what he was doing, he might have just stayed at that grocery store forever and never moved on.
And that right there brings us to the final big lesson of this whole story. The real win wasn't a promotion or a pat on the back. No, it was something way more valuable than that.
See, the true payout was wisdom. It was that deep personal knowledge he gained from sticking to his guns, from doing what he believed in, even when it made him unpopular. And that experience is something that's still paying off years and years later.
So, let's just end on this thought. Sometimes, when you do what you know is right, The reward isn't obvious right away. It can take a long, long time to see it. But eventually, you come to realize that the real payout wasn't what you thought it would be. It was the wisdom and the integrity you gained along the way.